I'll just quickly start. So again, everyone can hear me well, correct? All good. So first of all, please pardon my accent. I am not a native English speaker. So hopefully that will set some expectations for you, but I will try to do as much as I can. And if there's anything that doesn't seem very clear to you, or anything that you feel like that I didn't really capture the essence right, please come to me after the presentation. I will be happy to answer questions. So how many of you are first time here to the session that I host? Oh, quite a lot. Okay, so well, let me quickly just introduce myself for those of you who have never seen me before. So my name is Xiao. I am the design manager at FileMaker, managing the team of 4. So this is my 8th, probably 7th or 8th DEF CON. This is my 6th time speaking at DEF CON, mostly covering design subjects. So my background is pretty diverse. I have a bachelor's degree in fine arts, and I have a master's degree from New York University for a program called Interactive Telecommunications, mostly focusing on human-computer interactions. So let me just quickly to give a little bit more detail about my background. So I have a pretty diverse background. I am a web consultant. I was a producer of an ad agency. I work in the game industry, social media platforms, a small cloud technology firm that's later sold to the Beetle company, and also Yahoo Search. The platforms that I'm mostly familiar with are web, iOS, television. I'm the designer for Go and the designer for FileMaker Web Direct. And the teams that I lead produce FileMaker Cloud and FileMaker Server 17. And we're making something new. Unfortunately, I cannot show it to you today, but hopefully you got some idea of what we're baking during the keynote a couple of days ago. Obviously, those are not what we're producing, but you get an idea. All right, today's theme is about design systems. I will start with 2 slides to just give you a quick tone of what I will be covering. You probably have seen something like this before, online or in any other applications. When you're doing some research about design, this is a very typical design output that you've seen. And some call it style guide, some call it design patterns. So they're all different names that describes very similar concepts. So at the very highest level, a design system is something I call them bucket categories. And these bucket categories groups elements together via common attributes. You can label this element individually by functionalities, by its natures, by the interactive natures, and then also by the look and feel. You can also combine this together as a group to form a repeating pattern that you can use over and over again. So in the past, I have worked on projects from 2 months to 2 years. It all varies in size. There are clear benefits of applying design system into your general workflow. First is communication. So design system creates a common language for your team to describe a set of workflow that everyone can easily understand. Reusing design patterns also saves time and then makes your experience a little bit more consistent. It helps your teams to get agreements quicker because the potential design options can seem endless time to time. It's really hard to argue one way or another which one is better. The truth is that there are multiple solutions to problems. And last, design system shapes expectations for your team and for your customers as well. So if you perform a quick Google search design system, this is a very typical set of visual output that you were seeing. And this is really a very common documentations and an output for what really qualifies as a design system. It can be layout modules, process flows, component libraries, and style guide. So in most cases, the definition you see online is the design system is a set of deliverables, architectures and modules, component and process flow, repeating GUI components, visual style, and branding guide. So this concept is really not new, and you can find a lot of books, a lot of content online talking about what design system is. And they are similar, and they might have different names and different categorizations or different methodologies and different thought process. But at a very high level, the idea is very similar. So when we're talking about design system here today, I would hope that I don't want to get ourselves confused with design system to a system design, more like an IT perspective or coding perspective. We're solely talking about user experience design here today. So this seems pretty, just to give you a general idea of what design system is, but this definition has been talked over and over again, and it's really not something new. And it also seems a little dry to me. So today I would like to talk about something a little bit unconventional. So the topics I would like to cover is the goal is to really to leave the impressions and then give you the key takeaways of whys and hows in both practices and principles. And also my goal is to provide the toolkit that you can take away out of these presentations and then you can use it over and over again. So that said, today's presentation will be broken down into two sections. Each one will probably take about 25 minutes. And first half, I will be going through a set of slides talking about why and how I believe design system is important, and then how to capture the essence of what exactly design system is. In the second half, I will go back to FileMaker Pro and show you the step-by-step thought process of creating the app, and also have some design output that you can take away home. So I would like to start with a game, per se. How many of you have heard about implicit association test? Raise your hand. 2. 3. Okay, that's great. So you're all new to this. I played this game a couple months ago in a training program. I found it very, very interesting. So this program is developed by researchers at Harvard University. And the purpose of this test is this is an online test. And if you go to the website, and then you will see there are different types of tests you can take. The purpose of this test is to systematically measure the potential stereotypes or the inner bias associating with concepts like colors, race, age, and other potential social stereotypes. And I thought this topic is somewhat, or if I may say, highly relevant to the topics that I will be covering today. So today I will give you a quick test of gender and career. So in this test, I will be giving you two groups. Left is the categories, and the right is the items. So the categories to your left is divided into four. We have male, female, career, and family. And to the right, we have the sets of items. There are different names, and then, so the idea is that for each category, then you have multiple items that you can select from. The format of the test looks somewhat like this. So what I will be doing is to have all of you to take this 5-minute test, and I'll start with myself, and I will probably ask one of you, perhaps you can volunteer and do the rest of the test so that I don't really have to ask the entire room to participate and yell A or B. So when you see an item that is conceptually more closer to a category A or B, you say right or you say left. So I'm going to do the very first one myself. This is just 5 questions. It's very easy. So I'm going to put male to the left and then female to the right. So I'll start myself. Here you go. Right. Left. Right. Left. Left. All right, it's your turn now. So is there anyone who would be interested to volunteer to come up and do the rest of the test, 25 questions? So one thing that I will want to call out is that this test is completely casual. I'm not a computer, I'm not generating a data, and I will not call out it has nothing to do with social bias per se. So I will not reveal a potential bias that we all have in our brain. It's really just a fun exercise to me. So anyone who is interested in this, or do I have to ask the entire room to participate? So we have one person raising their hand. Thank you very much. Do you mind either grabbing the microphones there or just simply stand right there? And you don't have to tell me your names, and then like I said, I'm not going to call out that there is an inner stereotype that you have.
Cover my logo. So.
Yes. Thank you. All right, so are you ready? I'm just going to go out and continue to list out items, and all you need to do is say left and right. Okay? Go.
Left. Left. Right. Left. Oh, right. Left.
Good. That's pretty awesome. Thank you very much. And then don't worry, there's no judgment here. Just relax.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to make this a little more complicated. Don't think too much. Ignore the grouping here. I will explain why. And I will continue with this test. Go.
All right. Left. Right. Right. Left. Right. Right. Left. Left. Left.
That's pretty good. Thank you. So, appreciate it. Not yet. We're going to continue to have 15 questions here. So let me take a break here. So the real test consists of probably around 100 questions. So this 100 questions, you will continue to see the categories and then the combination continue to shuffle around. And toward the end, it's going to give you some kind of results. So for the interest of time, I'm trimming down to only 30 to make my point here. So let's just continue, and I'll explain why I'm having you to run this test. Okay?
All right.
So now what I'm going to do is to remove one layer and reverse the order.
Oh, man. You didn't tell me there was going to be all this.
It's not, yeah. So, well, thank you for your participation again. Okay, so let's continue.
All right.
Go.
Right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, oh, left. Damn.
One last one for 10 questions.
All right.
It's getting really hard.
Ooh, yeah.
Are you ready?
Doesn't help being in front of everybody.
Or anyone, if you're interested, please yell left and right. I think this is going to be an interesting psychological test. Okay, ready?
Yep.
Go.
Right, left, left, right, left, 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 right, right, left, right, left. Man.
It's hard, isn't it? Thank you very much. Please give a little pause. Thank you. And I'm really, I feel really relieved that someone is willing to participate in this test with me. So, like I said, in the real test that you'll be giving the combinations that continue, the order will continue to shuffle. And over more than 100 questions, the system is going to return some kind of a result that proof or tells you that there's a potential automatic association that you have in your brain with a certain concept. This is my result. The data suggests that I have an automatic association for male with families and female with career. Well, I'm not sure how accurate it is, and I don't really know how I should feel about this. If it's true or false, I have no idea, but I just found it very interesting. So again, test is called implicit association test. If you do Google finds, then you will be able to see a huge list of different type of tests, and you can examine yourself whether there is a potential social bias that you have in your brains or something that you don't want to share with others. Give it a check. So the reason that I'm bringing up this test is that I would like to ask you some questions. What influenced your choice? The purpose of this test is obviously to reflect the potential inner bias that you have inside your mind. However, I don't think that's the only factor. There are a lot more. Obviously, first is time limit. I purposely set the items to 1 second to force you to speed up your thought process and ask you to continue to answer questions rapidly in a 1 second increment. Words. Some words are easier to comprehend, some words are a little harder. And if I list the words that look similar, and maybe your brain get confused, and you cannot really tell it right away. The third is grouping. So I made the grouping a little bit simpler. It's just left and right. The real test is also just left and right, but the groupings and the layers of the grouping actually plays a factor here. Obviously, number of choices. The more choices I'm adding, it's getting a little bit harder to process. This is interesting, the order of test. So some of you might have, I showed this test to a couple of my coworkers, and the first thing that they captured in the middle of the test is that why I am grouping male and career into one group and female and family into another. I said it purposely so that I can mess up your mind. So here comes the established bias. So by a certain order of this test, we're creating a false or a potential bias that we are forcing users to think one way or another. And last is muscle memory. So this is also the important factors I will cover a little bit later in my second half of the presentation. So how is this test relevant to design system? Well, you'll be surprised how similar that the thought process are when you're using anything new, including applications. So when you're using a new applications, before you even try to learn and how to figure things out, you kind of just muddle through things and then trying to capture the potential signals that given to you that leads to actions. So this list, there can be a lot more factors, but I'm just simplifying into a smaller list. Hopefully I can get the point across. Well, coming back to this screen, this application is something that I will be showing later in the half of my presentation. I'll build this from scratch and then show you how my thought process is. So the very first thing that you can see here, I know that some of you in the back cannot see the detail here, but I would assume that the very first thing you see is that blue button over there. And that blue button is probably the most important thing in this app. I'll explain that later. So that comes to my very first message to you that you can take away. We muddle through things. So when we use an application, before we learn how to use or learn how to figure things out, we scan. We categorize identifiable groups. We label things and abstract out core properties. We group similar objects together. We connect actions to results. We link things together. So not only when we try to process what's going on in our brain before we act, there are cases that sometimes you will probably not even try to learn how to use it. You just use your hand, click around, and try to muddle things through. And then by sort of developing a certain kind of a muscle memory in your brains and in your hands to quickly, over time, master the potential navigation and the workflow. So this kind of psychological behavior is captured in this book called Don't Make Me Sing by Steve Krug. How many of you have read this book before? Okay, that's quite a lot. So this book was published, it's probably in early 2000, I believe. It's a bit, it's quite old. And a lot of the context here might already been outdated, but I think the information is very useful, and this book has been regarded as one of the must-read books for any of the new designers, and I highly recommend it. Let's move on. So in 1997, when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, the very first thing that he did is try to simplify the product line. And at the 1999 keynote, he showed this 4-grid. I did not put the image here, but hopefully you know what those items are. Demonstrating the simplified product line in 2 categories: consumer to professional and portable to desktop. So this notion hasn't really changed in the past 20 years. If you look at apple.com today, the information that is presented is very similar. So you also have portable to desktop, somewhat, maybe not entirely matching, but it also communicates the idea of consumer to professional. So if you compare this two, I think there is a key difference between these two here, even though the information, the intensity of information and the nature of information are similar. And in my view, I think the left has a better scanning workflow defined by tasks. And to your right, there is no particular context is really just 4 grids. But to the left, there are clear 2 categories, and we're asking users to pick the categories from low to high. And I call this instant reaction intuition, and to your right, I call it analysis. So as the developers, you need to know when do you want users to think fast and think slow. When do you want users to quickly muddle through things, and when do you want users to stop, think, and make careful decisions? These 2 paths are not mutually exclusive, but in general, at the very beginning, the very first experience you want to get users to is to provide the opportunities for users to muddle things through and provide the right signal for them to perform the action, or perhaps the right signals to call out what exactly the tasks you want users to do. So we use this app every day, and I don't have to call out the name here. So a lot of people call out that this is a very complicated, very difficult to use app, but we use it every day. And we're very familiar with the information flows on this site. So I am purposely just calling out that you can see that there is also, despite the fact that there's so much information contained here, and then you still see a very clear scan line for a group of tasks here. And if you do search, this is even more obvious. You have a very clear scan line for these 2 columns. A couple years ago when I was working at Yahoo, I came from Yahoo Search. We spent a lot of time trying to optimize this particular workflow. And at the time, maybe you still remember that time that there are ads to your right-hand side. And over time, it starts to disappear. Why? Well, for a very simple reason, people don't click it. They know that they can recognize this as an ad. And over time, what Google's and Microsoft and Yahoo, they're all doing the same. They try to extract the ad and put it at the bottom corner of your search result. And some are a little trickier. They will probably, nowadays, they will slice it into one of these results here, perhaps to trick you to click the ad. And in my view, Facebook is doing the same thing now. This is all metric driven. So what we have been doing is that we call it bucket test every month or every 2 by sampling 5% or 10% of the users. And we show them all different kind of combinations and then use that result to make the judgment. And a lot of this judgment is very based on the financial returns, which means that how many clicks that we get for apps, but not really talking about, it's less about user experience, it's more about tricking you to click and make money. So if you look at Apple.com, so the trend that they're taking is even simpler. So what they're doing is that they almost force you to focus on one thing at a time and only show you very, very limited information and then force you to perform that task. And before you complete that task, you move on. And that linear fashion, in my view, is a newer trend because people want something simpler in general. They just want to get things done. So that brings my second message to you today. Tasks determine relevant context. I think this is a very important notions to everyone here is that when you're building the applications, you do need to provide users that signals or that initial constructions to tell users what you're supposed to do. I talked to this quite a bit to my designers and then also some designers from other companies, and they're like, well, yeah, I understand that this is common sense. I'm not going to make a mistake. This is what you commonly see. And here's another example. So our EPM loved to use this app. I hated it. So without a clear cues of what text to perform. Your layout just doesn't really have that context to tell users what to do. And to make it worse, in my views, I think this type of design is a very common problem that I've seen in a lot of applications. I call it the zigzag information flow. This happens to even experienced designers. You try to think through all these different use cases and thought that users are going to understand, learn it, and try to spend time on it. The reality is that they don't want it. They just want to get things done. And that is, I think that is an expectation mismatch between your users and then designers. And it's very easy to overthink. And you thought you're covering everything, but maybe in the end, your user only want one thing. So when we design applications, you need to really step back and think about the connections between all this, the actions and results, and provide that necessary cues to give users a general idea of what to do. So this requires you to make things simple and direct user to focus on key use cases one at a time. So once you have the structure in place, and then you can drill down deeper and start to look at the data process in detail, the actions in detail, the contextual data and contextual actions for each bigger box, if I may say. So this would be the time that you can start to identify key actions and then the relationship between key actions and then contextual actions. Obviously, that would be happening. That should be happening after you have the overall structure and the signal of the text being completed. And by doing this, what you're doing is creating a certain type of informational hierarchy. I call this similar to you're building the folders except that this folder is flat out on the 2D flat space, right? And the approach of designing is really from, if I may say, core to fine, if that resonate. So you start from, I just bought a 3D printer not long ago, and I sand my 3D print all the time. And obviously you send through a lower grid first, and then you go down to finer grid. So in that principle applies to design as well. You always want to start with the bigger picture and then do small. What I constantly see is that people start building small and thought that the bigger things can connect together. You can do it that way too, but it's a little harder. Usually what I see is that when you start building small, you kind of lose track of what your users really want. And you start to continue to add features that increase scope, and turns out nobody is really happy. Maybe it satisfied the ego of the designers. So this process is really about sorting, and I'm just using this image to kind of give you an idea of what I had in mind when I'm arranging these boxes. So these boxes, small box will serve, each individual box serves a very unique purpose, but combined as a whole is a group that points to a very particular task that you want your user to do. So here's my definition of design system. It's a structured information, visual cues that help user to build the subconscious memory to make decisions quicker without the complication of analyzing. You can see this type of principle that applies to the products that we design. We have the very clear grouping structures and also give you a very clear identifiable items to tell you what a particular group does. How many of you have used Server 17, by the way? Well, a lot. Okay, so feel free to talk to me if you have questions or complaints about Server 17. So I know that there are some topics that we can talk about, but my focus is design here. So I'm not really commenting feature sets or things are being added or not being added. So that is really not the focus here. From a design standpoint, our goal is really trying to create a system that people can easily understand and can navigate. So in this case, you can see that there is a very clear list on the top, and there is a list to the left, and to your right, well, I have this notion of label, data, action, and it's repeated over and over again. So that turns out to be the right choice. We actually we got a lot of feedback from our users saying that they get it. What they didn't get it is from a transition from 16 to 17 because there's such a dramatic change. But if you started using 17 as a starting point of your FileMaker journey, we get a lot of positive feedbacks. So that brings my third message to you today: establish mental map, build confidence. So those are the three messages that I will be giving you today. And this established mental map is, in a sense, is some kind of a muscle memory that's embedded inside your brain as you start using using a particular application. Some of the applications are less optimized user experience. You will find that even you use it over and over again, you still can't really try to create that mental map and the muscle memories to complete a task. There are a lot of examples here, and there are a lot of problems that we want to fix in FileMaker Pro. So, but this is, I think, hopefully this notion is easy to digest and then easy to understand. So I'm going to come back to this. So now, I hope you find the connections between why I'm having you to take the test first, and then talked about design system, this three message. To me, they're all connected. So next time when you do an application, perhaps you can have your users to test out in this particular form, not necessarily a stereotype, but in the form that the design or the wireframe that you have to give out the signals that user can easily understand and identify in a very simple form. Am I supposed to do left or right? What actions I'm supposed to take? If I take the action, what kind of results I'm getting? So do I look back or do I look deep? So those are the interesting areas that I think you can continue to experiment with your design in the future. I'm wrapping up here. So these are the three messages that I will be giving you today. 1, we muddle through things. 2, tasks determine relevant context. 3, establish mental map builds confidence. I hope this will. This is something that is memorable and easy to understand. And one last thing that is very important for these three messages is that always keep in mind these three quotes is pointing to one goal. Your user wants to get things done. So it's really not about how complex or how thorough your design is. Of course, you want your designs to be thorough, but at the very end, design is really about helping users to accomplish the goal that they want to accomplish. And I think a lot of people miss that factors and thought that, oh, my user is not going to miss this. But turns out we actually did get a lot of support calls for a button right in front of them that they couldn't see. So by now, I think it will be a lot easier for me to move over to FileMaker Pros and talking about my thought process. So this would be the applications that I will be showing us an example. This application is a totally fake application. I made it up. This is an application for manage auto email schedules. And please read the small text at the bottom because that text is very important. I will show that text again. So now I'm going to close my keynote and move to part 2. So first, a lot of people ask me that, what's the right screen size for my users? Well, this is actually not a simple question to answer. Usually, in the web world, what we do is to pull up something like this. We go to Google search and then search for screen share data. So generally speaking, we get this number, 1366 multiplied 768. This is basically when we're designing an app, and then we're designing it based on this general number to begin with. However, I think the answer can be a little bit more complex. It really depends, honestly, it really depends on what your target users are and what are their primary screen size that they use. For a lot of companies that we visit, they use 4:3 screens instead of 16:9. So a lot of our designers also make the interesting mistake that they thought that their 27-inch screen is the monitor that everybody uses. Well, that's not true. My home, I use a 13-inch screen, 4:3, with a resolution of 1200, and that turns out to be quite common. So the way that I look at screen sizes is that, generally speaking, well, first of all, you can first reference to the most common number, and then come down to the potential numbers that your customers gives you, or the numbers that you imagine what your customers will be using. But I would say, from my perspective, from designers, I like this particular setup. When you look at 16:9, and then you have 4:3, and you have a little bit of gap here. So to me, it forms the most sort of comfortable experience. So that being said, in FileMaker Pro, I tend to start with something like 1300 or 1200. But there is another trick here. I know that for most of you who are familiar with FileMaker Pro, there is a constraint. And this is an area that we've been actively looking at. But I cannot promise any solution here. Is that, how many of you have used this tool, auto-sizing? Okay, so it seems like you're all familiar with this. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put an auto-sizing tool turned on to the right corner. That means now all of a sudden this starts to stretch. So FileMaker currently does not really have responsive tables or a proportional division table. So this, to me, is more of a walk-around towards a resizable screen size. I like to do it this way so that there are cases that when my customers is having a smaller screen, they can still insert data. But if they have large screen, they have larger viewing area. I just find that to be generally speaking, a good solution, or if I may say it, a good compromise. So let's start with a quick layout. And this layout is very much defined by this chart. I will be giving you this PDF after this presentation. So as you can see, this ID is defined by 1 and 1.1. So that means I am only targeting one task instead of multiple. So this is, in my view, an important notion, because I know that a lot of you, when you're doing a design, when you're designing an application, there's a tendency that you're trying to put the text into several different boxes. It's good that if your text is very simple and self-contained, but there are complex text that requires several contextual tasks to form a bigger group, which in this example it is. I have the tendency to break the task to something like the navigation over here. So that being said, I'm asking users to focus on this particular task, create and manage a schedule list, and send automated sales reports to selected head of department. So this, there are three areas that we can cover, and I talked about why this sentence is important, and also why there is a need for this primary action versus contextual actions here. So the data here is really just for your reference, so that I know that there is some kind of a high-level grouping of what kind of data I'm going to present to users. This would give you a general sense of how much real estate is going to take to start with. You won't get the actual numbers, but you probably can get a sense that the particular box will have like 15 fields, and some box will only have 5 fields. So it's very important to call it out in the very early stage of your project, and always focus on one task to begin with. So when I'm calling out one task, so based on the sentence of managing a schedule list and add a report and select a group of users, this is the design patterns that I decided to go with. I wanted users to be able to simply navigate across this concept by a left and right, which we call it master detail. You probably heard about master detail email. Master detail, you have the list to the left, and then you have the detail to the right. So that is what master detail is. So master details is widely used because for a simple reason, it's 2 columns. So if you add 3 columns, and then the third column and fourth column, well, I don't really know how to categorize it. Maybe there's a name for that, but I'm not quite sure. But master detail is a very common solutions for describing one-to-many situation. So that by providing that master detail UI, I will lock users to a very, I call it a predefined established mental maps that users can just look at the list, and then they know that when they interact with the list, and then they know that the right-hand side will change. So based on the sentence that I created, I am listed out schedules, reports, users. And the next things that I'm going to do is to add call to actions. So for schedule lists, and I'm going to create a list here. And I know that I'm not a super expert in FileMaker, but I know that when you create a record, the record is created before there's data in there. So I purposely want user to stop here before they create a record. So when you create a record, I'm not going to create a record here. I create a record after I type something. So that is one of the notions that I talked about, test schedule. Here we go. So I can delete a record and add a record by putting this popovers that asks user to stop and think a little bit before they create it. So once I create a call to actions, and I know that, well, this is create schedule, and this is to select a list of user, this is to add report. So I can potentially automate this process, but I didn't really spend a lot of time writing scripts here. I'm just talking about design concept. So the next things that I would do is really coming back to this chart over and over again, and then look at the verbs, look at the nouns, look at the data entry that I have, and start to create a general sense, a general layout structure. And then the next things that I do is almost like a jigsaw puzzle, so that I just play around with muddle through things, and then arrange the elements to form a very a grouping that I'm satisfied. So the end output would somewhat look like this. You see auto report, this is really just a tag here. So you see the schedule list here, and then you see time, which I know that I missed early on in my layout. And I have report and have users. So if you just look at these 4 boxes, I hope, well, you can potentially run a usability testing and see if people get what this is. So this, in my view, is locking users to a very specific task. To create a schedule, select the time, and add a report, select a list of a user. So that's hopefully is pretty easy to understand. And after this, I will start to look at common attributes for this element. For example, we have labels. And we have, sorry, I'm using a different plugin here. So we have labels, we have report, we have users. They all seem to be in a one set level of hierarchy in my view. Let's just call it labels. And we have data entries here, and we have data entry here. And we have reports instead of doing automatic reports. And I created a few fake popovers here, just to give you a sense, and just to get my point across. And for users, I know that I'm going to maintain the list here. And there can be the case I will want to do multi-selections, and I want to easily to add users and remove the user here in a batch format. And I don't want users to do it one by one, just like adding a schedule, because I want users to sync slow here, but I want users to go fast when they're adding a user. So instead of putting a UI of adding a user individually, I'm providing a few contextual actions here to allow user to perform search, and also having include a button called added recipients. So rather than add one users one at a time, I'm popping a list of users that I can quickly select. So that would allow the batch processing a little bit faster. So after all this arrangement from large to small, from call to find, what I will be doing is start to look at this common elements, arranging it, and go to themes. Everyone familiar with themes here? Okay, I believe there is another design session specifically talking about how to use themes. So what I will be doing is that I am basically create a save a new style here and name it. And you can see that I have a certain naming conventions that separate the new style versus the old style. So for each type of object, I have a particular set of options that I have. So once I have the themes ready, the next things I will do is to create something like this. So I know that a lot of people use this method, but I've seen several design FBAs and design firms that they're also taking this approach. To me, this is actually one of the easiest ways to maintain your design system. Internally, we use different programs. We use Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, and Photoshop. And lately, we changed our development process to Sketch. And turns out everyone in my team loves Sketch. The workflow is very fast, and it allows you to add certain kind of plugins to manage design system per se. It's less about the editing, photo editing, less about layer managing. Sketch is a little bit more workflow centric. So if you have never used it before or experienced it before, the design tools that I would recommend is Sketch. It's not very expensive, $99, and I think it's an annual license. I'm not planning to show Sketch because I don't want to derail these conversations to something a little bit different outside. So it just looks like we are about time here. And the one last thing that I will want to show you is that why is to give you a message that why this particular set is important. So you probably don't notice this here, or maybe you've noticed. I purposely used the touch theme here instead of the desktop theme. So for the touch theme that we produced in FileMaker, start with the 17-pixel font. 17-pixel fonts happens to be the iOS default font size. So that numbers, please memorize it. It's very important because 17 is the default font size that you see on your mail applications or any kind of text editing tools in iOS. And some people think that 17 is huge in 4:3 screen, but if you take 17s to an iOS device, you'll be surprised how small it seems. So I think it's really important. The short answer is that it's very important to test out all your designs in different machines, in real machines, so that you get that sense of distance and proportional sizing. Of course, if you do this for a long time, you'll probably get this kind of automatic association again, that you'll be able to easily pick the thing that you feel most comfortable without experimenting. But that requires time and effort. So the reason I'm setting the touch theme to begin with is that I knew that I'm going to have a mobile implementation for this application. So this also resonates the reason why I'm using master and master detail layout, because master detail layout is defined in iOS in this way. Tests, create a new schedule. So this creates that repeating muscle memory. Well, first of all, the style allows me to easily transitions between desktop and mobile. But also the layout is implying that this particular interaction patterns is matching other interaction patterns on different devices. So if you get a chance, I would encourage you to take a look of iOS design guide or even open Xcode to really understand what kind of default components that you have. Because most of the application designers, rather than they build their, other than game designers, so most applications are built based on the built-in design patterns provided in iOS. So one of the design patterns is this master detail layout, and some of them are like segmented control, which is equivalent of the button bar, if I may say, in FileMaker Pro. So those are the areas that we're actively looking at. What we're trying to do is to just continue to explore what kind of a potential use cases, potential design patterns that people are familiar with, so that we can gradually incorporate to FileMaker Pro in the future. So that pretty much summarized my presentation here today. Is there any questions before I close this out? Yes, please. It's a very good question. So people ask me this question all the time, and I think it really depends on your answer about the mobile version is the smaller version of desktop or larger versions of iPhone. So for FileMaker use case, if I may say, FileMaker's application tend to have a lot of fields. So people tend to not think about iPhone, and they think about iPad a little bit more. However, I would argue that's not true. What iPhone gives you is that mobility that not other devices can give you. So I would say that they are, in case that I would say that they're separate, but when you are designing it, I think the important part is you have to aware that are you going to do the mobile version? Or when you do the mobile version, you should ask yourself, are you going to do the desktop version? And so that when you start designing, you have to be aware. So I can't really say the order one way or another, but I think you have to be aware upfront that are you going to have a cross-device implementation? If you do, then you should be careful about the patterns that you're choosing. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, so feel free to come by. Any more questions here? Yes. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention this. So this file, along with a component worksheet and also an example style guide, and also the PDF of my slides will all be available online. Thank you very much.